Welcome to the Empowered Flow podcast. I'm Tris Alexandra, holistic clinical nutritionist, women's health and menstrual cycle educator, and mama. Join me and experts in nutrition, fitness, mindset, and holistic healing as we explore conversations to open your mind to a different way of thinking on all things women's health, hormones, periods, cyclical living, and fertility. Whether you're seeking knowledge, inspiration, or a supportive community, you've found your tribe. Let's dive in. Chronic stress, unprocessed emotions, and trauma can be stored in our body, impact our nervous system, and in turn affect our hormones, fertility, and overall health. When we learn to feel and process our emotions, manage stresses, and regulate our nervous system, we build emotional and stress resilience and optimize our health and hormones. In today's episode, I chat with Sarina Coventry, a women's health nutritionist and clinical EFT tapping practitioner. Her mission is to empower women so that they can transform their relationship with their body, hormone health, and maintain a regulated nervous system. Sarina supports women's emotional health, helping them to gently move through stress, anxiety, and overwhelm. She is passionate about teaching women to work with their body rather than against it so they can holistically restore a state of well-being and thrive. In today's episode, we discuss what cyclical living is and how we can incorporate it in our lives and honor our menstrual cycles, how cyclical living helps us build deeper self-awareness, using cyclical living as a framework, not a Bible, what led Sarina into working with women as a clinical nutritionist and EFT practitioner with a focus in women's health and cyclical living, how the nervous system works and how it impacts our hormones, what are survival emotions and how these, as well as unprocessed emotions, can impact our hormones and fertility, practices we can do to regulate our emotions and build emotional resilience, and what EFT tapping is and how it can help us to process emotions. I hope you love this conversation, and I know that there is just so many gold nuggets of wisdom in here and so many takeaways that Sarina shares with us. So enjoy. Sarina, so lovely to have you here. So nice to connect with you again.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this chat all week and can't wait to dive into some of the topics we're going to be discussing. So thanks for having me.
Oh, no worries. And do you know what? I was thinking about there's so many things that we could talk about when it comes to stress, nervous system regulation, hormones, cyclical living. What I wanted to start with, given that we both have a passion for menstrual cycle awareness and cyclical living, I think for women to even get a tiny glimpse of how we incorporate cyclical living into day-to-day life, I wanted to start with you sharing what day in your menstrual cycle are you on and how do you honor this phase of your cycle?
Yes, I love this question so much. So I am on day 13, so I'm very, very close to ovulating. And in honoring that, I know that generally, not always, it depends on my stress levels, but generally around ovulation, I have the most energy and the most capacity. So doing this podcast was perfect because I knew that I'd be able to show up and have a lot more clarity in my thinking and my words, as opposed to, say, in menstruation or my late luteal phase. So this week as well, I have gone a little bit harder in the gym because I feel like I've got more capacity. I'm really trying to hit 5K in running. I know for some people who run, they're like 5K, but 5K feels like this huge deal for me. So this week I've been training a bit more for that. I honor it as well by really just tuning into how my body wants to eat. So I know around ovulation, I'm not as hungry. So this week's been a lot of like beautiful light broths, with noodles and eggs and chicken and all the goodies.
Yum.
And then in terms of business, I try to really, wearing so many hats, you would know this as well. When you run your own business, there's a lot of hats that you wear. So I know that around this time I have the most capacity. So I try and organize social media and content and any writing or blogs that I'm going to do and kind of forward plan for the month ahead in terms of goals. Because I know that I've tried doing this before in my luteal phase and my brain is just like, nope, we don't want to do this.
Yes. Yep.
And then I also know that I have more capacity for my friends during this time of my cycle. So as I said before, I had my little nephew come and sleep over last night. He's 4. We had a cute little sleepover. And I make more time for friends. And, yeah, use the energy I know that I've got when I know that later on in my cycle I may not have it.
Yeah, for sure. I
Yeah.
love that. And I'm in a similar phase of my cycle to you. I'm actually, because I'm breastfeeding and I don't have a menstrual cycle, I'm cycling with the lunar phases at the moment, and we've
Yeah.
just had full moon. So I'm, in a similar phase, like just had that really big, like full moon ovulatory energy. And I feel the same,
Yes.
like full of energy, totally happy to go, socialize and be out there and connect with friends and family. I'm not really working aside from podcasting, but I'm like at the moment I have so much energy for my business. I'm like, yes, let's do the
Yeah.
podcasting and let's do, all the content and show up on social media. So yeah, I totally feel you in this phase.
I love that. That's when you have, I know like during this time, I always have notes my notes in my phone just fill with all these ideas and things to create, because I know that if I try and create them towards the end, it's just a no. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
cheese gratery.
For sure. So I know I shared a little bit of a intro to who you are and what you do, but I wanted you to share from in your own words a little bit about yourself, like personally, professionally. Who are you?
Yeah. Personally, I mean, being a nutritionist, I'm a huge foodie. I love food, and I actually cook a lot of my meals. So every Sunday, my partner and I have got him into the habit of we do a big cook up together, because I just prefer to eat home cooked meals. Love it so much. Huge foodie. Obsessed with the outdoors and nature time. So I try and get outside as much as I can. Um, I know it sounds cliche, but my friends honestly mean the world to me. So I'm so grateful to have such a beautiful network of really incredible I tell them all the time, top tier, powerful, powerful women around me. And I put a lot of my time and energy into those women because I just think they're amazing, and I just think women are amazing.
Mhm.
So super grateful for this network. I am an auntie to my 4-year-old little nephew who I'm just obsessed with. And I think since he was born, it's unlocked this desire in me to be like, I can't wait to be a mum one day. And
Mhm.
he unlocked this space in my heart that I didn't even know was there. And I can't even begin to imagine. I know you've got kids and a brand new little baby, but I can't even imagine what it would feel like to just have that as your own. So yeah, I'm
Yeah,
definitely excited to be a mum one day.
love it.
Um, I love the environment. I'm very careful with the products that I use. I hate waste. You can ask any of my friends. I'm like, we're not going to waste that. We're going to reuse it in some way, shape, or form. Um, what else? I love coffee. I will never stop drinking coffee. I only have one a day, but I love my coffee. It's like my
Oh,
favorite time in the morning.
you and me both.
I honestly wake up. It's beyond the taste of the coffee. It's like the whole ritual. I wake up and I
Mm.
make it and I sit in the sun, and it's just that time for me in the morning where no one's talking to me, or I don't have to do anything or be anywhere. So yeah, I love my coffee. And yeah, where I live, I'm very grateful. I'm in the northern beaches of Sydney, so I'm close to the beach, I'm close to bushland, and just being able, we've got this beautiful little path from my house that I walk down most mornings to the beach, and just getting that time outside, even if it's 10 minutes in the morning, I just absolutely love it. And I'm very curious. I think being curious has got me into trouble sometimes because I question a lot of things about everything and anything, and I want to know how the world works and why the world works that way and why humans exist. And it's definitely helped me in my career develop over time, because everything and anything I learn, I question, like, why does this happen? Why do humans feel this way, and why do we process emotions in this way? So that curiosity has definitely led to yeah, the way that my career has panned out and built on itself. And I guess professionally, I love the women in my life so much as my girlfriends, that being able to extend that into supporting other women with their health, with their hormones, with being able to show up to this world feeling more resourced, more resilient, being able to help them to be in their power. I feel like I was put on this earth to do that. And I care about those clients a lot, probably too much.
Mm.
But each woman I see, I just feel I want to help every woman be able to thrive. And I think we're at a really exciting time in the world, and we have all these opportunities where women have this capacity to step forward and really be whoever and whatever they want to be. And I'm so excited that I get to help them reach their health goals or clear the blocks and, help them to step into that power. So, yeah, it started off with more in the nutrition, cyclical living space, and now it's kind of slowly started pivoting into more of the nervous system, EFT typing space, which I'm sure we'll talk about more. But yeah,
Yeah.
I don't do my job for like, it's not a money thing. It's literally, I just care about these women so much. So, yeah.
I love that. I love that so much. I think we really are at a really exciting and interesting time of change too when it comes to women's health. Like there's
Mm.
so much evolving in the women's health space. There's so much more information coming out. There's so many more, like we're finally starting to see more studies done specifically on
Mm.
women because, as you know,
Thank God.
previously it's all been predominantly in men because women have hormones and menstrual cycles that complicate research and complicate studies. So it's a really exciting time to be involved in the health space. And then I think even from the perspective of, you talked about women really stepping into their power and like, realizing who they want to be. I think it's a really exciting time of change around that too, which yeah, absolutely love.
Yeah,
Good time to be in
definitely.
this space.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you blend like a few modalities into the work you do. So you're a clinical nutritionist, you're a trauma-informed EFT practitioner, you're also deep in sharing menstrual cycle awareness and cyclical living, and they all really complement each other in supporting women's health. What led you on this path, like led you into doing this work? Because we were having this conversation before and you started talking about you just kind of almost fell into this. It was like it was
Yeah,
meant to be. So tell me a little bit about that.
totally. Well, I think a lot of the practitioners I speak to in the natural health space, whether they're in their naturopathy, nutrition, a lot of it has come from either their own pain or their own curiosity. And mine was kind of a combination of both. Um, I have always been interested in psychology and how food influences our mood. So I actually started studying psychology when I was 18 or 19, and then I ended up dropping out, started studying nutrition because I realized psychology wasn't the path I wanted to go down. And midway through my nutrition degree, I was diagnosed with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. And it was this huge shock to me. I was like, this is so weird. I'm so healthy, I'm fit, I am a nutritionist, I eat really well, I do all the kind of like right things. How has this happened? And I took
Mm.
a lot of time to reflect. And I actually went through a pregnancy term, and I've spoken about this before. I actually went through a pregnancy termination when I was 21,
Mm.
purely because it was too early on in my life to have a child. I wasn't ready. I had all these big things I wanted to do. And I realized when I was diagnosed with PCOS, I felt like my I was being punished for this pregnancy
Mm.
termination. And it was awful, right?
Gosh,
I was
yeah.
so young, and I was like, wow, I've done this to myself. This is my fault. And took me on this whole kind of roller coaster. And I started looking a lot into the nutritional side around research around PCOS. And it was in the beginning stages of lockdown where I actually found Alyssa Viti's book in the flow.
Yes, yep.
Um,
Great book. Mhm.
Great book. And honestly, if I ever get to meet her one day, I will let her know that she was almost like the straw that broke the camel's back in me figuring out what I wanted to do. Because when I finished nutrition, I wasn't sure which avenue I wanted to go down.
Yeah.
And then having that diagnosis of PCOS, trying a lot of the kind of nutritional protocols, and they actually weren't really working for me.
Mm.
And then I found this book on cyclical living, started adopting the principles, and so much changed for me. My acne, my weight, my energy, my like appetite, my overall happiness.
Mm.
So much started shifting. And then I used to talk about this a lot where cyclical living, and I share this with clients as well. It kind of opened this doorway for me into exploring myself and my emotions. And often this happens to a lot of women because when you start tuning into, well, what phase of my menstrual cycle am I in? How am I feeling? What's my energy like? It does open this whole other doorway into like an exploration and personal development of
Mm.
yourself.
Yes.
Um, so within that, I realized I had some very big emotions and very big things that I wasn't processing. I found EFT tapping through my mum actually, and she was like, come and try this thing. It might help you process some of your emotions, reduce how intense this emotional experience that you've been having is. And I saw it and I was like, what are these people doing? This is so weird. Why are they tapping on these places on their body? And I signed up to this 4-day workshop with one of the leading trainers in Australia, and I just absolutely fell in love with it. And I realized how chronically stressed and suppressed I was. And I used being this busy girl as a coping mechanism for so many of the painful things that had happened in my life, including that pregnancy termination. And I
Mm.
realized that doing all these things and seeing all these friends and having this really, really full schedule, sure, I loved it and it was serving me to a degree, but it was actually just a coping mechanism for not wanting to look at all of the kind of bigger things that had happened in my life. And I started to see a lot of this actually playing out in my clients. So women with PCOS or endometriosis, um, so many of them had actually experienced some level of trauma to their womb space.
Mm.
And I do a lot of work around, we've probably all heard of the book The Body Keeps the Score and Gabor Mate, When the Body Says No. And I really, really believe that stress and these stored emotions and all the things that we're not processing significantly impacts our body. Um, so yeah, as I said to you earlier today, I never thought I'd be here doing the work that I do. Um, but it was, yeah, really out of my own pain, my own curiosity to find more and support myself more and then support my clients more, that the path just kind of unfolded itself. So
Yeah. Like it was
yeah,
meant to be.
yeah, like it was meant to be, and it's been
Yeah.
it's been a journey, um, but I love being able to support women with their menstrual cycle, with their reproductive health, and then with the emotional side and binge eating and anxiety and stress and overwhelm and all these things that play into the worsening of all of our health conditions.
Mm. And it's so interesting what you said about cyclical living really opening that door to building more self-awareness, because that was a really big one for me.
Mm,
And like you, was diagnosed with PCOS, was doing all the nutrition things, and yes, it was helping somewhat for me, but there was something missing still.
yeah,
And I still wasn't getting like full resolution of symptoms. And when I started to deepen my own awareness of self and my emotions, and moved into that space of cyclical living, I was the same. I realized that, for me, it was, for so many years, when it came to my emotions and stress, it was distract, push it away, push it down. And it was
yeah,
like I had just bottled up all of this stuff.
yeah,
And as you know, it's kind of like that analogy when we talk about like a cup overfilling, and you have these emotions, and imagine every emotion, every stress, every little thing that happens in your life, and the cup just starts filling and filling and filling and filling. And then I would
yeah,
find I'd get to that, that top, and it'd be the smallest thing that would set me off, with whatever emotion it might be, anger or frustration or sadness or whatever it may be. And then I'd do the same, and then I'd push it away and push it away. So it was really building that self-awareness and building awareness around my emotions and emotional triggers and stress, and all of that made such a big difference to my hormonal health, and then like my overall health as well. So yeah,
yeah,
I love that about cyclical living, and the fact that we have this opportunity with our menstrual cycles to use it for growth and transformation, and so much more than just knowing like, oh, I ovulate at this time and my period comes at this time. Like, yes, that's all helpful too,
yeah,
but it's so much, there's so many layers to it, and it's so much deeper. And it does, like, for anyone listening, I just want to say there is a lot to it, and it takes time. It takes time to build that awareness in your own body and in yourself. So don't feel like that, you're going to start learning these things, and then yeah, it takes time. That's what I really want to say about it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think when you can, like a lot of society at the moment, we want a quick fix. We want
Mm.
something that is easy, we get results really quick. And the thing about cyclical living is it does take time, but you can use the skills. I mean, I've been practicing this now for 5 years, and there's still things that I learn about myself or my body. Things are constantly changing. But you can use these skills literally across your entire reproductive life. So, although we want this quick fix and this quick solution, there is something so magical about deeply building that relationship with yourself and your body so that
Mm.
anything that happens, anything that shifts and changes, you're able to be in tune with it and be like, okay, what do I need? Or how is my body feeling and how can I support it?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Before we jump into talking about, because I really want to talk about the nervous system and stress and
Yeah.
how that plays into hormones. Since we're on the topic of cyclical living, I know you've shared something online recently when you were talking about a really important point when it comes to cyclical living or cycle syncing, as some people know it,
Mm,
because it is starting to gain more popularity and become more known and become like move more into the mainstream. You talked about the potential of having the message of cycle syncing or cyclical living being watered down through, you know, blogs and dot points and things like that. And I think exactly what we're talking about now, it is about building that awareness in your own body. Can you
mm.
talk a little bit about, I guess, how we can use cyclical living, how we can use it as a framework to build that self-awareness rather than just having like, oh, this phase of your menstrual cycle will feel like this, and this phase you should be doing this.
Yeah, of course. And I think this is such an important topic to be discussed when it comes to cyclical living because there are so many hardcore frameworks and diets and I don't know, all these things that we want to just do perfectly, and cyclical living is not that.
Mm,
So, yes, it is a guide, it's a framework for how your body may feel, how your hormones may influence you, but it is a framework and not a Bible. And the difficult thing is it is, I understand in terms of mainstream media, it is hard to capture all the different parts of cyclical living. So it can be watered down to be this kind of clear picture that women are able to start using. And I think some of the articles and the frameworks are great to get
mm,
women in touch with themselves and their body, but there is so much more. So when you start tuning into your innate cycle, you know, how you might be feeling in your luteal phase, how you might be feeling in your follicular phase, if you're actually even ovulating, and how you show up in each of these phases is going to be really important to know how to listen to your body and to work with it. And there is a danger in the cyclical living guidelines if women adopt these quite hardcore. Is I had a client who she did have a lot of hormone imbalances, but she was almost on opposite cycle. So when she was going in her follicular phase and her ovulation, she actually felt awful. And then when she was in her luteal phase and coming into menstruation, she felt much better. And she actually carried a lot of shame and a lot of frustration with herself and her body that she wasn't operating in a way that these guidelines recommended that
mm,
she operate, because she was like, I just don't feel that way. And so yes, the guidelines are amazing, but I think women should also know that each body is going to be different. And you know, it may be that when we start supporting her hormones and she regains that balance, um, she may start feeling a little bit more like those guidelines recommend, or how they suggest you might feel. Um, but when clients are starting to move into cyclical living and understand it, I get them to ask themselves three questions each day. Is what day of your cycle are you on? What phase are you in? And how does your body actually feel? Because sometimes we might have a bleed where we feel completely flawed, and it depends on what's happened in that month, in the last 3 months. Things that happened 3 months ago can show up in our cycle 3 months later. And it might change the way you show up and feel in each month of your in each sort of phase of your cycle will shift each month. So being able to tune into that, and there's many factors that play into it as well. So if we think about ovulation being your inner summer where you might have the most energy, if you've had an immensely stressful month or stressful few months, you've gone through a breakup, you've moved houses, you're just depleted and exhausted or burnt out at work, then you may not enter that inner summer, inner ovulation bouncing with energy. And it
mm.
may be that for that whole month, you actually need to go a little bit slower so that your body can recuperate. So there's a lot of different parts to it. And then same thing in terms of, you know, our inner winter and our external winter. Um, Or actually, I'll use the example of your inner summer. So when you're ovulating, some of the guidelines recommend eating more raw foods. I believe that when it's a winter outside and it's really cold, that actually eating those raw foods isn't going to be supportive for our body. So it's then finding a way to eat lighter, but also in a warming way. So I say
Mm.
like light broths with like veggies and some form of animal protein, instead of having this cold, raw salad that might be hard for us to digest when it's also freezing outside.
Yeah, I love that. It's really it comes down to really personalizing it and like you said, just building that awareness in your
Yeah.
own body and in your own self. And I think the other thing it does is when we if we're looking at, these, yeah, like looking at it as like a Bible and these strict guidelines that we need to follow, we expect our body to feel and function a certain way at different
Mm,
times of our cycle, or we expect our cycle to look a certain way. And then when it doesn't, we end up pathologizing that, whereas maybe it's not. So for example, I've worked with clients before and we've done a lot of work in their nutrition and lifestyle and gotten their hormones to, a really great place of being quite balanced and having these like healthy regular cycles. But then like you said, they might have had something happen in their life where it's been really stressful, or they've had a really, busy,
mm,
stressful time at work, or something's come up. And then a couple of months down the track, they start to get symptoms in their menstrual cycle. Maybe their period was heavier, maybe they had cramping that they hadn't been experiencing before. And they start to worry like, oh, something's wrong, like something's wrong. And I'm really big on saying, well, no, your body's just sending you signs and symptoms. It's adapting to its environment, it's adapting to what's happened. Like, let's look back on the last few months, what's happened in your life.
yeah,
Because I'm sure we can find, multiple things that have potentially affected the cycle. And it's not that there's something wrong, it's just that our body's responding to that. um
totally.
and and then the next cycle might be back to quote unquote normal again, or back to what their normal was. And so I think, yeah, having that understanding and that awareness around cyclical living just means that we kind of stop pathologizing our body all the time. Not to say that we shouldn't be concerned about signs and symptoms, but we stop pathologizing everything that happens and just start
Yeah,
to have an understanding about how our life and our environment and things can impact our cycles and our health.
totally. On that note as well, one thing I've noticed a lot is now that people are talking about menstrual health a lot more, maybe it's just my feed because I'm in that world, but I think there's also this obsession with having a perfect menstrual
Mm,
cycle and having these perfect phases where we feel exactly this way in our follicular phase or exactly this way in our ovulatory phase. And that can also be a detriment to women because if they then think that they have a little bit of period pain or they feel a little bit irritable in the week lead up to their period, they're like, oh my God, I shouldn't be having any of these signs and symptoms. That means I have a hormone imbalance.
mm,
We are constantly shifting and changing. And one of the beautiful parts of being a woman is that no month will be the same. And our hormonal system, our reproductive system is so sensitive. And the world that we live in, there is a lot of stress and there's a lot of big things that happen in our life. So, like you said, these small signs and symptoms is just a message from our body to look at it and be like, okay, well, what's happening? Where might we need a little bit more support?
mm,
Instead of um, berating ourselves and getting frustrated and be like, I don't have a perfect cycle. What's wrong with me?
mm.
Because no one's going to have a perfect cycle.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about stress then, because like stress plays such a big role or has such a big impact on our health. And I want to talk about how the nervous system works. So connecting that, I guess, that stress piece with how does the nervous system work and how does that impact our hormones?
Yeah. So keeping this very basic because the nervous system is super complex, and there's many different parts. But the main role of our nervous system is to keep us safe, and so it's constantly on alert for threat. So very basically, we have the central part of our nervous system, which consists of our brain and our spinal cord, and then we have the peripheral part of our nervous system. So if you can imagine all these nerves coming out from our spine, obviously your spinal cord is on the back, but coming out from your spinal cord to the tips of your fingers to the tips of your toes. This is our peripheral nervous system. Then within that, we have two parts called the autonomic part and the sensory part. Now, the autonomic part of our nervous system is kind of like the automatic part. There's constantly checking in internally if we need to speed up our breath. If we haven't had enough food, then maybe we might start feeling a bit hypoglycemic, make us feel a little bit anxious. So we're like, okay, we need to go get food. We then have the sensory part where it's constantly looking out for things that we see, touch, feel, smell that will be of danger to us. So if we touch a hot plate, we have this immediate response of pulling our hand back. Then in our brain, we have something called the amygdala, which is our emotional threat center. So within our amygdala, it can't actually distinguish between past or present threat, emotional or physical threat, or real or perceived threat. And I know when I first learned this, I was like, wow, that sounds like such a biological like failure of humans to
Mm.
not be able to distinguish between all these things, because then there's all these things that are constantly impacting us. And that means that whether something is real, so whether there's a car coming at us that's coming 100 kilometers an hour, or whether we think about, being late to pick up our child from school, both of those responses activate a threat to our life, to our safety, even though picking up our child from school and being late won't kill us the same way a car might impact us. So if this threat is activated, we'll release those hormones cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline from our adrenal glands. And each of these stress hormones has a bit of a different impact on our body. So for example, cortisol will dump blood sugars into our bloodstream. Adrenaline will increase our heart rate and our blood pressure. And it is normal to have a stress response. It's normal for us to kind of come up and down. I think that the idea of never being a stressed person or never being impacted by stress is not, that's just not reality.
Mm.
But having these extreme highs and these extreme lows, or these chronic highs, is where we start to see massive impacts on our hormones. And today often we are chronically stressed. We're chronically stuck in I forgot to talk about the sympathetic and parasympathetic parts of our nervous system. So within our peripheral nervous system, there's the automatic, autonomic part and the sensory part. And then there's also the two parts, which is like our threat and our safety parts.
Mm.
So we have the sympathetic, which is kind of our threat danger system that will get activated. This will cause the autonomic part of our nervous system to respond by dilating our pupils. It will reduce blood flow to our reproductive organs. It will stop us from producing stomach acid. It will increase our heart rate so we can have that threat response. Whereas when we're in our parasympathetic part of the nervous system, which is more of our calm, our rest and digest, this is going to impact the autonomic part of our nervous system to bring down our heart rate, to start sending that blood flow back to our reproductive organs, ensuring we're digesting our foods properly because we are calm, because we are safe. So when we are in that chronic stress response, we are sitting in that sympathetic part of our nervous system. And so these stress hormones that I mentioned before become chronically elevated. And our
Mm.
body will always produce these stress hormones over our reproductive hormones. So our estrogen, our progesterone, our luteinizing hormone, our FSH, because it just wants to survive. And I
Mm.
know that there's so much more in the nervous system than that, but it's just a bit of a brief understanding of how much we are influenced in this day and age by all the different things that are happening, whether it's actually going to impact us or not. So when these hormones are chronically elevated, the stress hormones are chronically elevated, we see a reduction in these sex hormones. So this means that we may not be ovulating, we may have worsened PMS. I think a lot of the fertility issues that we're seeing at the moment is because we are so chronically stressed and busy and
Yes.
full and at capacity.
Yeah.
Those chronically elevated stress hormones will impact our thyroid. So it will reduce the production of these thyroid hormones, or their activation or their conversion to these active parts, say our T4 to our T3. We can then develop issues such as hyper or hypothyroidism, which again will impact our weight, our energy, our fertility is a huge one, our menstrual
Mm.
cycle is a huge one. One of the biggest things I see is insulin resistance in relation to stress,
Mm.
because what happens is when we're stressed, and cortisol rises, it dumps sugars into our bloodstream. So this can start to blunt our insulin sensitivity. So for women with PCOS, this can worsen their symptoms. For women trying to lose weight, this can worsen their symptoms. They're trying all these things. Often the big cycle I see is these women who are really stressed is then they reduce their calories even more,
Yeah.
which worsens their body into a heightened stress response because it's like, oh my God, now we're not getting enough food.
Yep.
So it just perpetuates this cycle.
That's such a hard cycle too, because I see that a lot. And the hardest thing with women in that situation is getting them to eat more. Because in our minds and what we've been taught and what we get bombarded with,
Yeah,
media messages is eat less, move more, lose weight.
yeah,
And we see the other side of it. We see the impact that that has on hormones and on the stress response.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah, absolutely. It's huge. Chronic stress also increases that desire for sweet and salty foods with high energy and low nutritive value. So these women, if they're not eating throughout the day properly, then they get to the evening and all they want is the biscuits, the lollies.
Mm.
Sometimes this might be alcohol, the ice cream. And again, it's just perpetuating this cycle. Um, and the I guess the basic message in terms of how stress impacts our hormones as a whole is that when we're stressed, the body perceives that we're under a threat. So the body is going to shut off its normal reproductive function to prioritize survival. So if we're chronically stressed, there's no way the body's like, right, let's ovulate because ovulation means that we may potentially get pregnant and have a baby. And there's no way that the body wants us to get pregnant if we're in this threat and survival state.
Mm.
Um, and that's one of the hardest things to shift in women. And this is kind of why I started adding in EFT tapping, is because there was only so much that I could do with these women in terms of life. There are a lot of lifestyle adjustments that you can make
Mm.
and a lot of somatic exercises that you can do to start calming down our nervous system and our stress response. But yeah, it's the biggest thing people need to work on and the hardest
Yeah.
thing because we can change our diet, we can change our exercise, but we can't get into our body and be like, hey, just if you could just sit in that rest and digest state, that'd be great. We have no control over it.
Yeah, for sure. Do you know the other, like just backtracking a little bit, the other big one I see a lot of the impact that stress and chronic stress has is on autoimmune conditions. So things like Hashimoto's,
Yes.
endometriosis. I know endometriosis most people think of as a hormonal condition. It
Yeah.
is very much a autoimmune immune system
Yeah.
dysregulatory condition as well. And in recent years, there's been such a huge rise. I don't know, and I should have had a look, but I don't know the exact percentage, but there's been such a huge rise in autoimmune conditions and particularly in women because women
Yeah.
are diagnosed with significantly more autoimmune conditions than men are. And that's because of the impact that stress and chronic stress has on our hormones and on our body and then on the immune system as well. Like
Of course.
it's so connected. Like all of those parts of our body are just so connected.
It's so connected. I'm actually reading a book at the moment called When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate. And
I love his work.
I absolutely love his work. Like if I could have
Mm.
dinner with that man, it would just
Oh,
be incredible.
just yeah, I
But
recently read his The Myth of Normal, which is just
yeah,
well, it's just so big.
it's so big. There's so many parts to his work. But
Mm.
in this book, The Body Says No, and I'm not going to give any stats because I'll completely butcher it, but he actually talks about heightened levels of autoimmune conditions in women because we are often the ones who struggle to say no.
Mm.
So we take on the most load. We feel like we have to do the most things. So our body is often quite stressed and is at capacity because we prioritize everyone else around us and then we put ourselves last. So
Yeah.
he strongly thinks, and he's got some amazing research to back up his findings as well, that because we are always doing so much for other people, autoimmune conditions is our body's way of actually saying no for us.
Yes. Yeah, I've read some really interesting research on that as well. And
Yeah.
in women particularly, but just in people in general, in not having strong enough boundaries and saying no, and then there being an increase in certain types of autoimmune conditions, which is really interesting.
Yeah. It fascinates me. The body is
Yeah.
just, it's so intelligent beyond, I think, what we even know about it so far.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I'm reading a book. I'm nearly finished at the moment. Uh, Dr. Joe Dispenza's, oh gosh, I've got
Breaking the
baby
habit,
brain, and that no, the
breaking
other
the
one,
habit of
this,
being
this
yourself,
no, the other
becoming
one, this
supernatural.
becoming supernatural. Yes,
Yeah.
yep. And it just like there is just so much more outside of our what we perceive in our senses that
Yeah.
is, yeah, is just so much bigger and so much that we really don't know. But also, I think just on that, because we're talking a lot about, you know, how stress impacts our health and our body and all these conditions, I strongly believe, and from all of this work from, you know, Dr. Joe Dispenza and other people that I've read, is that we have the ability to heal. It's just really
Yeah.
about providing our body with the right environment and the right nutrients and the things that we need. And that's
Yeah.
not always an easy path, and it's not always one that that is successful. But I do have that strong belief that we do have the ability to heal.
Yeah, of course. And if you
Mm.
tie it all back into cyclical living, in order to be able to heal ourselves, we need to be able to understand and know our body. What
Mm.
feels good, what doesn't feel good. And cyclical living, when you start understanding what phase of your cycle you're in, how you might be feeling, it just adds to that ability to be like, this feels good for me and this doesn't. When I'm around
Yeah.
these people, this feels good for me, this doesn't. When I eat this way, it feels good or it doesn't.
Yeah. Let's talk about emotions then,
Mm,
because you touched on perceived, a bit, I guess, perceived threats and how that can impact the nervous system. And I think emotions is one that we don't always realize that can be a, I guess, a perceived, quote unquote, perceived threat to the
yeah.
body, unprocessed emotions, things that are stuck in our body, survival emotions that we experience. How does that impact our body? How does it show up in signs and symptoms of our body?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and often we, like you said, we don't think about emotions impacting us in that way. And when there's kind of five main survival emotions: fear, anger, guilt, shame, and disgust. And if you think back to a time where you were really angry or you felt immense guilt or immense shame, I often use this exercise in workshops where you can feel it in your body. Like if I think back to times where I felt guilty, it's this like pit in my stomach. I almost feel it in the back of my throat, right? Um, and when we look at emotions, I often refer to them as energy in motion. So when we experience an emotion and we don't get the opportunity to fully process it, it gets stuck. And the example I use a lot is within animals. You see animals do this a lot where, let's say, for example, there's a duck in a pond and a crocodile's coming, tries to eat the duck. The duck goes into this threat fear response, tries to get itself out of this pond. It survives, gets to the end of the pond, looks around, knows that there's no more crocodile, it's not in danger, and it will start shaking. So when it shakes, it's almost completing this process of stress. In humans, we can do this to complete the processing of emotion or stress, and it's moving that emotion. It's energy in motion. This is why so many somatic practices involve like jumping or like shaking out our hands because it helps to move it through us. And it closes this loop of the stress response. It kind of completes it. So it's letting the body know I was stressed, now I'm safe, and now I'm recovered. The thing that happens in humans is we are so busy, we are so rushed, we are so quick to move on to the next thing. Um, or when we grew up in a house, we were told that it wasn't safe to express our emotions. We were either punished or we were told off. So as an adult, we actually don't know how to process them or even
Mm.
acknowledge them because we've internalized so much. So it all gets stuck. We're not processing anything because back in the day, and unfortunately, looking at our nervous system and our amygdala, where it can perceive anything, whether it's real or not, as a threat, it hasn't yet evolved to meet us where we are now. So back in the day when we were cavemen, there might have been two big things that happened in a day. And then otherwise we were sitting around, we were talking, we were in circle, we were weaving or whatnot. Whereas nowadays, from the moment that we get up to the moment we go to bed, for most of us, this day is full. It's one
Mm.
thing to the next. Waking up, get the kid for mums, get the kids ready for school, take them to school was probably traffic. You're probably then late for work. You're at work. You're like, oh my God, is my boss going to be mad at me? Or but just this constant rush of things to do. Then you finish work and it's like, okay, we've got to get groceries before I get the kids to school. Pick the kids up from school and then we've got to cook dinner. And there's just so much,
Yeah.
so much, and we're all completely at capacity. So again, when these stress cycles are not completed, the body may actually operate in a way that it still believes these events are occurring. So if something really big, this isn't for everything, but if something really big happened to you in a part of your life where you didn't get the chance to stop and process what that was, that amygdala, the emotional threat center of our brain, will take sensory parts of that memory. So things that happened that made you feel unsafe, that you saw, heard, smelt, tasted, felt in your body, and it will tag it. So that if something then happens in the present moment that slightly resembles what may have happened in the past, our body will still go into this stress response. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
very much so. Yeah.
Yeah, because often that's a huge thing that can be a bit complex to explain, but it's a way of highlighting how our body just holds on to so many different things. So, in terms of how that then shows up in our body and signs and symptoms, is a lot of physical tension and pain. Physical tension and pain is one of the biggest things I work on with some clients, and there's so many emotional parts to it. Because when we are stressed, we're holding, oh, baba. When we are stressed, we hold our body really taut, or we get these digestive issues because the body has reduced blood flow and has stopped secreting these digestive juices. So we might get IBS or bloating, or we have issues with our gut health. Um, I work alongside a naturopath who specializes in gut health, and she actually sends a lot of her clients who only get so far because they have anxiety or because they have issues in their gut. Oh, hey, Baba.
For those that can't see, I've got my little 1 month old in my arms today, and he's been asleep and he's just kind of waking up. So if you hear some little noises, you'll know why.
Little coos.
Yeah.
So beautiful. Yeah, like you said, in terms of the signs and symptoms of these unprocessed emotions, we get a weakened immune system. Our weight fluctuates because we're emotional eating, or we have elevated cortisol, we have sleep disturbances, anxiety, depression, so many different things that I think a lot of us don't attribute to our stress response. Feelings of being triggered, always feeling low or exhausted. Yeah, there's so many like different ways that this unprocessed emotion shows up in the body.
Yeah. And I want to talk about, so if we have these unprocessed emotions, I want to talk about how can we start to, I guess, actually process them, integrate them. Like I've, recently become a mum of two, like a lot of people following me on Instagram or even on the podcast will know that I've shared. And it's such a beautiful time. And I'm, obviously filled with so many positive emotions, all the oxytocin. But I can also say that in the past month, navigating sleep deprivation alongside my 3-year-old toddler, he's really sensitive. Like he's got such a beautiful, loving, caring nature. He's also very strong-willed. He knows what he wants. He knows what he doesn't want. But because of that, it's, there's just been so many huge emotions with him. It's such a big change in his life. And then having to keep my own self-regulated, regulate my own emotions, regulate my nervous system has been, quite a challenge and quite a learning curve for me. And it's almost like reparenting myself, because I feel like I'm teaching him to regulate his emotions and process those emotions at the same time that I'm doing it as well.
Yeah.
And I'm sure so many women can relate to this, either in a similar situation, whether they're mothers, or just for many other phases of their life where they've found themselves struggling to navigate life stresses, or finding themselves feeling less resilient to stress than they had been before, or having quite big emotions, or detaching themselves from their emotions. I think that's a really big one that we tend to do as well. We use social media, we use, TV, we use all sorts of things, alcohol, to distract ourselves from the emotions because we don't want to feel them. So how can we start to regulate our emotions, feel those, process them, and then build emotional resilience?
Yeah, it's a huge question, and I think, I'm not a mum myself, but my heart goes out to all the mums, and I have so much compassion for them, because sometimes when you're having a moment and you feel like you have nothing left to give and you're completely at capacity, you have small children and you have to keep going.
Mm.
You don't get the opportunity to lie down and have a tantrum and kick and scream the same way as our children might, because your job as that parent is to keep going and keep supporting that child. So it can be immensely difficult, but there are really small things that you can do throughout the day to start giving back to yourself. And one of the things I think is the biggest in terms of starting to regulate our emotions is actually noticing and tuning into your body's signs of when you may start to feel overwhelmed. So what are the warning signs that you are starting to feel overwhelmed, or that you're starting to feel stressed, or that you're starting to feel anxious? Because before it goes from 0 to 10 and you find yourself having a meltdown, you've locked yourself in the kitchen cupboard because your kid's having a tantrum and you just literally cannot handle it. When you start to notice the warning signs, is it a tightness in your belly? Is it shortness of your breath? Did you just have a snap and you've realized that, okay, maybe I just need to take a time out? It could be starting to feel, this change in your breathing. When you can acknowledge that, just having compassion for yourself and be like, okay, I'm noticing that I'm really starting to feel overwhelmed, or I'm starting to feel too stressed. Is it possible for me to take a step back for a moment to just have a breath, to just have a quick cry, or to have a quick scream or yell into a pillow? Will help us to start acknowledging the emotions and then regulating them. What I see so much in clients is this is where the practice of self-compassion comes in, is they will actually judge themselves for their emotional experience, which then worsens the emotional experience.
Mm.
So they're like, oh my God, I'm so stressed right now. I shouldn't be stressed. Why am I stressed? And then it heightens the stress instead of just being like, okay, right now I feel really stressed and I feel really overwhelmed. Where can I pull back for a moment? Um, where can you find 5 minutes in the day? This can be really hard as a mum, but where can you find 5 minutes in the day to create a bit of space for yourself to do some very basic regulating tools, whether this is deep breathing or humming, or just sitting there with your arms, wrapped across your body. For those watching, you can see my arms are just crossed and lightly touching or squishing your arms, just to bring yourself down a little bit and just to land a little bit. Um, Another thing we use a lot in EFT tapping is orienting. So just stopping for a moment and looking around at all the different things that might be happening. Noticing, if you're in your house, noticing what the walls look like, noticing what it looks like outside. Because when your eyes look around and in that sensory part of your nervous system can see that nothing is actually coming to hurt you or to threaten you, it will help ground you a little bit.
Mm.
Um, Obviously, my favorite practice and what I do with all my clients is EFT tapping.
Yeah.
Um, we may not even get the chance to go into all of that, but there is a free downloadable resource I have where women can start to use that. And when we tap on these acupressure points along the body, it sends a calming response to our amygdala. So it helps to calm us, helps to regulate us. And then again, we build that emotional resilience. And you can use that anytime, anywhere, whether it's in the car, you've just dropped a kid off to school, whether you get home, it's bath time and your kid's having an absolute meltdown and you're really struggling to navigate all these big things happening in your life, you can, even with your kid, just start tapping on these points.
Yeah, I love that. I think these tips and these tools and resources are so helpful. And I was just about to say as well, they're things that you can do with your child as well, even when they're
Yeah.
young. Like my son's 3, and we've been teaching him, with his big emotions, we've been teaching him about breathing, or even just about like, how do you feel, like naming those emotions, and how do you feel? What do you need right
Yeah.
now? Do you need a cuddle? Do you need, what is it you need? And it doesn't always work, but you can see them slowly starting to learn and to pick up on these things. Even
Yeah.
with the breathing thing, my son a little while ago, um, we were with my mother-in-law, and she was really upset about something, like some big things happening in her life, and she was getting a little bit teary. And my son said to her, he's all of 3, and he said to her, Ma, just breathe, Ma. And I was like it brings
Oh,
tears to my eyes just like thinking about it, but it was just like so
yeah.
beautiful in that moment, because even though we've struggled to get him to do that when he's needed it, he's obviously picking up on it and he's obviously learning it.
Of
And I'm sure he
course.
will do it eventually, but he's seeing like the need for it, which was just amazing.
Of course. And as a mum as well, I think that you have such an important and amazing role in letting your kids know that you don't always have to be happy. I know
Mm,
there's lots of mums out there that want to be, and again, I'm not a mother, so I only speak to what I have seen and witnessed, but we want to be this perfect mum who can do it all, who's always happy, who's always calm. And if you can let your child see, maybe mummy's shedding some tears, mummy's feeling a bit upset today, and she just wants to sit and take some breaths, you are teaching your child that it's okay to feel and express their emotions,
mm,
and that it's safe to express their emotions. Because for the most part, with a lot of the clients that I work with who have troubles expressing their emotions as an adult, it's because as a child they were told off, or they were sent away, or they were left to be alone when they had a tantrum, teaching them as an adult that it's not okay to feel
mm.
or to express these emotions. Or it goes the other way where they become these really volatile, angry adults because they start to feel a little bit uncomfortable and on edge, and they have an explosive response because they were never taught how to kind of regulate themselves.
Yeah, yeah. One that I know that I'm really conscious of is, and I don't know whether I must have picked this up as a child where I was taught, like not to express big emotions, like, oh, don't cry, it's okay, that kind of thing. Whereas I'm sure my parents were doing what they thought was right at the time, trying to,
Of
stop me from
course.
crying, because they were trying to, no one wants to see their child cry, and they're like, don't cry. And I find when my son gets really big emotions or he's crying, I go to say that as well. I have to really watch myself. I go to say, don't
Yeah,
cry, it's okay, instead of like, helping him actually let that out and
of
process that emotion.
course.
So like I said before, it's really been like parenting and reparenting myself at the same time, but it's been really
Of
helpful for me
course.
into navigating my own emotions and processing them.
Yeah, and there's really amazing resources that you can get online which actually teaches children. There's like little faces and the emotions underneath them, which starts to teach children how to express what they're feeling. I know with my 4-year-old nephew, I've tried doing tapping with him, which sometimes he's into it, sometimes he's not.
Yeah.
But, if he starts getting frustrated at something and he's kicking the toy or he's throwing the toy, I'll try and get down on his level and I'll say, okay, what's happening? Do you feel sad? Do you feel frustrated? And just instead of being like, stop throwing the toys and stop getting
Yeah.
frustrated, that's not okay, it's getting down on their level and trying to help them figure out what's actually happening for them.
Yeah, absolutely. If you've got time, do you want to talk more about EFT tapping? I know you
Yeah.
touched on it before, but just share anything else you want to about how you use EFT tapping, how it can be beneficial and how it can help with processing emotions.
Yeah, of course. So EFT tapping is emotional freedom techniques, and it's a evidence-based form of cognitive and somatic therapy. So cognitive meaning the mind and somatic being the body. And it works with the amygdala, that emotional threat center that we talked about before. So when we're gently tapping on these acupressure points along the body, which are based on traditional Chinese medicine meridian lines, um, most people are familiar with acupuncture, where often we're using needles in these meridian points, whereas EFT tapping, we're gently tapping on these points. And it sends a calming signal to that part of your brain, the amygdala, the emotional threat center, to let it know that it's safe and that it's okay. So when we're tapping, we may be tuning into physical experience of stress or overwhelm, what that feels like in your body, working on past experiences, memories, events, or traumas that have happened, um, or things that like beliefs that we have about ourselves. I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. um, yeah, beliefs that we have about ourselves and the world around us, or food cravings. And so we're able to tune into those things which feel uncomfortable, that we often don't want to go into. And while we're tapping and talking about those things, it sends that calming response to our brain so that we can shift from this state of stress into a state of calm. And when we use clinical EFT, we do get quite specific on some of the events that may have happened or the sensations in our body, so that we can actually decouple this stored stress response from that feeling. So that something that happened in the past that caused us a lot of stress and angst now, we're then able to think about it without having such a big emotional response. So the women that I work with are often very anxious, very stressed, very overwhelmed. They have a lot of painful or negative beliefs related to themselves and their body, or a lot of negative relationships with food, where they're binge eating or emotional eating a lot. And so much of it stems back to our childhood and things that we learned in our childhood. Literally, what you just said before is like, the way that your parents may have interacted with you and the words that they have said to you, it almost gets like ingrained in your body. So EFT tapping helps to um, reduce the emotional intensity of these past experiences whilst helping the body to feel more calm and grounded and at peace. And in terms of all the research articles that are out there, it's such an efficient tool for reducing cortisol, and not just in the moment, but when we use EFT in a very clinical way, it has long-term effects. And one of the big things I talk about, because if you Google EFT tapping, there are so many videos online, and there's almost two different types of EFT tapping, where there's the clinical side and then there's more the what I call the pop culture EFT. And the
Mm,
pop culture EFT often is using tapping and just talking about affirmations, or um, I am worthy, or I am calm, or I am present and I am grounded. But often that will only support these people in the moment, because if you don't
mm.
really truly feel those things, then long term, your body, like, I just have an issue with affirmations because if you don't actually believe them, then there's always going to be this little niggle in the back of your head that's like, I don't really believe that. So there's only so
Yeah.
far you can get, right? Whereas with clinical EFT, we really meet you exactly where you're at, whether that's feeling angry, frustrated, mad at your boss, you're just overwhelmed in life and you constantly have this tight feeling in your chest. We give you space to actually just talk about that thing and to process it. And the analogy that I often use is, if you imagine a garden and you have this garden with weeds and with flowers, if you're only trying to water the flowers, which are the good things, which is kind of this like toxic positivity that we have in
Mm,
society,
yeah.
you're also going to water the weeds. And with EFT, what we do is we actually look at the weeds, we start pulling out those weeds so the flowers can actually naturally flourish. And then when we water them, they can get even bigger. And most of the time, if I talk to people who've said they've used EFT before and it didn't work, I say, okay, what kind of EFT did you use? Was it a video online? Were you using it with yourself, or were you working with a clinical practitioner? Because with the clinical practitioner, we get really specific on what the things and the parts are for you that are impacting you and your stress and your everyday life. And that's where we see those long-term results.
I love that analogy too, because it feels to me that like, just using positive emotions all the time, which is great, but just using that, it kind of almost feels like we're just covering up the actual real emotions that we're feeling. And I think that analogy like
Yeah.
perfectly sums up the difference there.
Yeah. And if you were feeling really angry, if someone had just made you feel really angry and upset, and you told a friend, and your friend said, well, just feel happy or just think
Mm.
positively, it's probably going to worsen that
I
anger.
was gonna say I'd probably feel really irritated by
Yeah, or you'd feel
that.
really unseen and really
Yeah,
unheard.
not
Whereas if
unheard.
that friend said to you, okay, why are you angry? Like, what's happened? That will
Mm.
help to discharge and process that emotion. And so much of the time we live in a world, and I know when I was more in like the spiritual space and manifestation space, I thought that if I said negative things, they were going to come true. And when we are tapping, it's simply not true. It's giving you space to actually feel what you're feeling and voice the things that may not feel socially acceptable to voice, so that you can move through them and process them. And then you create space for all the good things to happen.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Like, I
It's
just
okay.
absolutely love the work you do. I love, yeah, just it was so helpful and so many great resources that you've shared with everyone listening. Can you
Good.
also tell us, like, what have you got coming up in terms of, like, I know you sometimes run workshops and have different offerings.
Yeah.
What have you got coming up, and where can we find you if anyone wants to work with you?
Yeah. So at the moment, I don't have any workshops locked in at the moment, but stay tuned because they're always coming up. I do offer one-on-one sessions. These are online or in person, and then I also run a monthly group tapping circle. So the themes of this tapping circle changes each month. This month, it's on the 12th of August, we're actually looking at things we want to manifest or call in. So we start looking at the beliefs as to why this might not be true or might not be possible, which I feel really excited for that one. But yeah, people can find me online on Instagram at Sarina Coventry, Sarina. There's no E's in there, or on my website at sarinacoventry.com. And I've got the free intro guide to EFT tapping if you want to learn a little bit more how you can start to build your practice at home. Or I've got discovery calls that I offer to, see if I believe there's so much healing that occurs just in your relationship with a practitioner. So I think that knowing that you and that practitioner work well together is really important. So I've got those discovery calls if people want to ask more questions or, see if we're the right match.
Beautiful. Love that. And I'll share that in the show notes as well for anyone looking
you.
for those links. But thank you so much, Sarina. It's been such a beautiful conversation. I'm so honored to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute blessing. And yeah, I hope if someone is able to take, one or two things from this episode, then job done.
Thanks for joining us on the Empowered Flow podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, I'd love you to share it with a friend and take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. Your support means the world and fuels our mission to empower women everywhere. You can also reach out to me on Instagram at Tris Alexandra Nutrition. Sending big love. I'll catch you in the next episode.